Good afternoon. The Justice says he wants to quit while he's ahead, but no. It is my tremendous delight as Dean to welcome here to campus Justice Clarence Thomas. We will have a conversation, and this conversation is presented as the Herbert W. Vaughan Lecture. I'm going to say a word about Mr. Vaughan, and then a word about our honored guest, and turn to questions. Wiley Vaughan was a graduate of this school. He graduated in 1948. He had a 47-year career at the law firm known as Hale & Dorr that later became Wilmer Hale, and he was the go-to lawyer for developers and lenders involved in reshaping Boston's landscape. He was devoted to the legal profession, to the fundamental principles of our legal system, and that devotion was outstripped only by his own example as a superb lawyer, leader, and man of fine judgment. He endowed a lecture series, and he said that we must begin each of these events with a statement to be read aloud to the audience. And my predecessor, now Justice Kagan, agreed, and therefore I'm reading the statement aloud. The statement is as follows. I, Herbert W. Vaughan, have endowed this lecture at Harvard Law School to promote and advance understanding of the founding principles and core doctrines of American constitutionalism. What Alexander Hamilton said to the Americans of his day remains true for Americans of every generation. And then quoting Alexander Hamilton from the Federalist Papers, it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country by their conduct and example to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Mr. Vaughan goes on, in my judgment, the Constitution of the United States is the greatest practical achievement of political science. It is a testament to the extraordinary gifts of creativity, prudence, and high-mindedness possessed by the founders of our nation. May you be guided and inspired by their genius as you meet the challenges of the present day. Mr. Vaughan passed away a year and a half ago, and I had the good fortune to talk with him many times, and I said to him, who would you most like to come and be a lecturer in your lecture series? And we are very honored to be joined here by his first choice. Justice Clarence Thomas was born in Pinpoint, Georgia. Perhaps no one has ever traveled as far in history to become a Supreme Court justice. From a childhood in the racially segregated South, where he knew what it was to be cold and hungry. A graduate of the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and the Yale Law School, no hissing is allowed, Justice Thomas turned down his admission to the Harvard Law School. I think, as I understand it, he found the school too large and, if I'm right, too conservative.
Yeah.
He then began his career in Washington. Following that, working initially in an amazing job for the then Attorney General of Missouri, John Danforth. He then worked for Monsanto, a company, and then he became legislative assistant to Senator Danforth, and then Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Education. And then in 1982, President Ronald Reagan appointed him to be chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where he became the longest-serving chair. President George H.W. Bush nominated Justice Thomas to serve on the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, and followed by nomination and confirmation to his current post at the United States Supreme Court, where he has served since 1991. Justice Thomas is beloved by his colleagues on the court. Recent members of the court, who shall go nameless, have told me that no one there has been more welcoming and supportive, and no one has a better sense of humor. It brings me enormous pleasure and joy to welcome you here, Justice Thomas. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions, if that's all right. You want to comment on your views about Harvard? Or no, maybe we leave that aside.
Well, First of all, thank you all for taking time out of your day. I feel a little embarrassed to drag you all out after first semester grades came out. Someone asked me today about how I felt after the first semester of law school and what my game plan was, and I just told them I was just glad to be a survivor. I was not one of those students who's just sort of the wind was under my wings. I was just hoping not to take a nosedive. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm delighted that you all would take time out of your day to spend a part of it with me. And I hope it's worthwhile in the answers that I give to the questions. And some of you, I started this morning with a breakfast with some of the students, and I have to say the day has been consistent with that breakfast. It was absolutely delightful. Students were bright, they were energetic, they were engaged, and it's exactly what I would have expected. But again, I'm just simply delighted that you would take time out and be here.
Oh, thank you. Would you tell us a little bit about your childhood, about your schooling experiences, about your life as a young person?
Actually, when I look back on my life, I had a good life. It had its challenges, but every time I go back to Georgia, I'm very, very happy I grew up in Georgia. And
Who's from Georgia? Anybody? All right.
Well, there are not many of us around, but the people I grew up around, of course the times were difficult, but the environment I was in, the cocoon I lived in, was just fabulous. I'm very pleased with the nuns. I mentioned to some students recently, they were bemoaning the fact that our education was somewhat compromised in the South. And I was just saying maybe it was in some ways, but when I got out of high school, I had 3 years of Latin, 2 years of German, and 2 years of French. And you had physics, chemistry, mathematics, et cetera. But there was a real push in all the schools I went to be well educated. And of course, I didn't grow up speaking at home standard English. So that was always a challenge, and it took some years to make sure that I did that. But the desire to learn, when I think back, I reflect back, where did that come from? The desire to read, to see different things. It actually came from a segregated library. In 1955, I went over. We lived in the lane across the street in one of the very common tenements. And the librarians had a program in the basement. They were reading children's books. And one of the series they were reading were these Dr. Seuss books. I had never heard of him. And I thought that was the most amazing thing, that there were all these things in this book. So we would go over, that would be the summer of 1955. And I think if I had to point to a moment that said to me, there is something between those covers, it would have been that moment. Wow. And that would, for years after that, I made many, many trips to that library in Savannah. And I met a young woman today from Savannah, so she would know where it is, on East Henry Street. And I had an opportunity years later, long before I went to the court, to write those ladies in that library and thank them for the gift they gave me. I don't think they knew what they had given me, and I don't think the nuns knew exactly what they had given me. But that love, and I'm sure each of you has an experience similar, somebody along the way who pulled you aside and gave you that sort of affinity for learning that has stuck with you. And it certainly, for me, it started in 1955. So when I think of my education, I think of having been given a gift by some people who really cared about a young kid who lived in an environment that was mostly uneducated. That finally there was a value on education that was different. I grew up with people who were not lettered people, most of whom couldn't read at all. It was not uncommon when someone was signing something, they would simply make their mark. or they would take your word for it, or they would be upset if you asked them to sign a contract because their word was the contract. So in that environment, these people, my relatives, my neighbors, treasured education in a way that a person who's hungry would treasure food. They understood it in a different way as something that they never had a chance to have. So it was truly something important. So they encouraged me to be that way, and my grandfather, who always made us work, it's just wouldn't let us play sports. I was a pretty good athlete, but he wouldn't let us play sports. He thought that was foolishness. Any leisure in his mind was foolishness. But he would always allow me to go to the library, and that would carry over to the Savannah Public Library when that was desegregated in the 1960s. I would take the habit of going to the library to Savannah Public, and that has continued. So my education, actually, if I had to characterize it, it was having been taught the love of learning and the joy of being educated by people who were not and people who cared about me.
You have had probably more varied jobs than just about anyone who's ever served on the court. And your legal jobs included work at legal aid even before you were a lawyer. While you were a law student, you worked with a civil rights firm in Georgia. Your work with the state attorney general. You practiced criminal and tax law. You worked at Monsanto and Department of Education, the EEOC. As you think about your career, which jobs did you find most rewarding? Which were most challenging? How would you advise students as they think about jobs? When you think about what did it take to get where you are now? Were any of these steps that you thought were taking you someplace in particular? How do you reflect on those jobs, those careers?
Well, let me start by saying that I didn't think anything was taking me any place. You know, when you don't have a model for what will happen next, you just do what's in front of you. It reminds me when we used to work in the fields that there's row after endless row of menial work in that sun. So you never look down the row. You go from bush to bush. Right. And you learn how to internalize that discipline to do things. I had no idea where it would lead or where anything would lead. As I've said to others, I simply did my best. And others can be cynical about it, but you know, I knew of nothing else. You learn particularly one of the terrible things about bigotry and racism or any of the negative isms in our society is that it takes the hope out of you. And it takes the desire or the will to hope. You're scared to hope because you don't want one more dream dashed. You know, those of us, this is sort of a little example, but I think it's illustrative of the point I'm trying to make. Those who in this room who, for example, as little kids lost their father or didn't care about him or something, after a while you stop wondering if they're going to show up for Christmas. You can't allow yourself to think about it. You can't allow yourself to hope for something at Christmas or your birthday. Similarly, when you are in the position that we were in, you couldn't hope that it would all work out. So when I left Yale, and I didn't take the job in Savannah with the civil rights firm, I was married, had student loans, a kid, and I needed a job. So I allowed myself to hope, to think that it meant something to have gone to Yale, to have done well in school, and so then it rears its head again. So I can't say that I had these dreams. The most I could do was get up every day and do what my grandfather said, and that's put one foot in front of the other. And it became an endless series of putting one foot in front of the other. And I can look back in retrospect and connect the dots, but I will be not telling you the truth, and I would be less than candid if I said to you, I knew ahead of time where it was all leading. I did not. I was doing it because this is what I was supposed to do. and maybe it felt like swinging across the ocean or something. This is what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to, as my grandfather said, get up every day and put one foot in front of the other.
Did you like appearing in court?
No. Especially as a defendant. I'm just kidding. I am not, my personality is not such that I enjoy public appearances. I tend to be more on the introvert side. Actually, I tend to be quite introverted. And it is very difficult to do those sorts of things, but I did them. I remember my first experience in court. Of course, I did, like a lot of us at Yale did, I avoided things like trial practice and moot court. I show up in Missouri. I was sworn in as a member of the Missouri Bar on September 14, 1974. September 17, 1974, I made my first appearance before the Supreme Court of Missouri, arguing a case that I did not brief. And that's the way it would go for the next 2.5 years of briefing and arguing cases and traveling across the state and filing petitions and defending the State Tax Commission and the State Department of Revenue. So I didn't like it any more than I liked school or Latin, but it was required to do the job, and that's what I did. But I could go a lifetime without making public appearances or without going to court.
Justice Thomas and I are both fans of a book by a Harvard Law grad called Quiet by Susan Cain, which is about being an introvert. Anyone here an introvert? Don't be shy. No. And so one thing that you might be interested to know is that her research indicates that introverts often bring qualities to leadership and to analysis that are very, very valuable, and we are therefore even more grateful to you for being here today. You are one of the very few people ever who has served in all 3 branches of government. How do you compare the legislature, the executive branch, the judiciary? How do you think about their relationship, and how do you think about being in one and having served in the others?
I like being a judge a lot better. I enjoyed EEOC. I liked the people very much. I liked our mission. We tried to make it all work. I did not like the politics. I didn't like the sort of the noise around that job, because it didn't comport with what we were actually doing. But I enjoyed the people immensely. I enjoyed what we were trying to accomplish. I enjoyed the legislative branch, but there was too much compromising and back and forth, and I don't understand politics, and it made my head hurt. It was like new math. I just didn't understand it. And I've never been political in that sense. I don't get involved in that sort of thing, because that's out of my, it's really out of my area. I don't understand it. Being on the bench, I loved the DC Circuit. I really enjoyed the DC Circuit. I like the people there. I tend to get along well with people, and I like the people there. I like the work, and I could have stayed there. But I think I got maneuvered into this job. And then I had a really bad interview. And so I think just follow Nancy Reagan's advice. If they nominate you, just say no. But I like the people. This job, it's quite different from the Court of Appeals job. I think the best part of the people I've worked with over the last 21 years, there's not a person that I did not like working with. Wow. They were quite different. I enjoy, it doesn't matter, you hear people talk about, who do you agree with? Well, I mean, there are people I don't like, I agree with in life. But the people at the court, we've been enormously fortunate. Not only have they been capable and engaged, I sit next to Ruth Ginsburg. Now, you cannot say she is not enormously capable, but what a delightful person to work with. Elena Kagan, who just showed up, exact same thing. You say to her, it's going to be a joy disagreeing with you for years to come. But you wind up making each other better. I don't think you make each other better simply by agreeing with each other. You make each other better by sharpening the arguments, by making people respond, by making people think, by making the counter argument. You also don't make people better with insulting opinions or negative things or ad hominems. You engage the argument. And what you find at the court is some of the most wonderful phone calls you get are from people who disagree with you on that particular case because they saw an argument they hadn't thought of, and now they have to respond to it. And you do the same thing. You say to them, I think that's a good point you made, Ruth. I have to give it some thought. And that's when you know you're growing as a judge. And one thing one of my colleagues said recently, who's very fond of her, he said, very close friends with her, said, she makes all of us a better judge, or better judges. I agree with that 100%. So it is not the agreement, it's the way they do their jobs. And I think you learn that, you start in school learning that, that how do I disagree with people who are fundamentally different from me, whose opinions are different from me? Do I yell, do I scream, do I raise my voice, or do I engage them constructively? One of the things I demand of my law clerks is that we work corporately as law in my chambers. All 4 law clerks work on everything. Now that's pretty cumbersome, but I said, look, we don't run one cylinder at a time. We go together. And I don't hire jerks. And one of the reasons is I don't want that bad attitude in my chambers, because what is required, we have very hard things to do. There are very strong opinions. There are disagreements. And I need people to disagree in a way that moves things forward, they're not disagreeable and disruptive, or think that they have the gospel and everybody else have just a mere flawed opinion. So I think you learn it early on. How do you conduct yourself with others with whom you may or may not agree, who might have a slightly different opinion or a much, much different opinion? And I think you see it reflected at the court. You see it, I saw it on the Court of Appeals. I thoroughly enjoy working with the people at the court. The current composition, the Justice O'Connor, who I think is fabulous, Chief Justice Rehnquist, all of them. The court's different now, but no less a decent and good place to work.
It is known as a remarkably collegial court right now, and with friendships, and your name comes up over and over again as someone who everybody just likes so much and helps to build the sense of collegiality.
Well, why don't they vote with me? They just kindly disagree. People say, why don't we have more of these? Why do we have so many 5-4 opinions? That's because the other guys won't join us, or we won't join them. I don't know which way it is, but it's just it is indeed a wonderful place to work. And I must say, since she was here as your predecessor, that Justice Kagan is just a delight to have there. Just a delight.
Tell her we miss her. Now, you told me that you have lunch together as members of the court, but you have some rules about what you talk about and don't talk about.
No business. There are jokes, there's music, sports, books that people are reading, but no business. And I think the rule for that is, it's enough, we're tired. And you come from conference and it never ends. Chief Justice Rehnquist did not want an extended conference. He wanted people to simply get to know each other. And so it is, in 2 decades, it is actually a very interesting lunch. And when we lost Justice Souter to the North Country, we lost a wonderful man and an elegant storyteller. So if you can invite him and have him tell some of his stories, he is a wonderful, wonderful colleague. And if you see him, tell him we miss him a lot. But he had great stories, and people had this image of him as this very sort of reserved New Englander, but he was hilariously funny. And Justice Breyer, he's been sitting next to me for 2 decades, also just a funny man. He has this habit during arguments of drawing stick figures. And he could show you, he always has something going on. I tend to be quite monastic in my approach to things, and he's bouncing around, and he's always got an idea, and he shares them with me on the bench. But it's just an absolute delight to sit with him. But
you do see you two chuckling together.
Oh, he is hilarious, and he's very, very smart, but he's sort of a moving around smart. And I tend to be someone, if I lock into something, I want to think it through for a long time. And he likes to move around, and I sort of rein him. And every so often what I'll do is I'll say, "What about this, Steve?" And he'll pop up and ask a question. I said, "Steve, it was just something I'm throwing out." So you can blame some of those things on me, because I'm just asking him, "What do you think of this?"
Justice Thomas, you started to explain how you organize the work in your chambers, how you work with the clerks. Can you tell us more? I mean, you participate in the cert pool, and some people here don't know what that is. But how do you divide your work between reviewing the applications for review versus the merits cases? And do you read the briefs in hardcover, or do you read them in online? And just how do you do the work? How much do you do in the office, and how much elsewhere? Just give us a flavor of that.
Well, one of the things about the job is it's portable, and thank goodness for technology. It's even more portable now. But one of the things, when I arrived at the court, there was not as much technology, and Chief Justice Rehnquist was not really all that interested in these devices called computers and that internet. And so at any rate, I said, "Chief, we're going to have to automate." He said, "Well, you chair the committee then." So the rule up there is if you make a suggestion, be willing to do the work. So, I mean, we're quite automated now. No, actually, it wasn't because of me. It was because I stayed out of the way. But I work very closely with my law clerks. My view is I've got these smart kids there, and they will all work together, and we will work as a team. So I do cert petitions like Sunday. I always do my review pool memos on the weekend. So when I go in on Mondays, when I headed this way on Monday, I gave it to the police officer to return to the court. But it's usually several hundred. But I have my spot. Justice White said when I came to the court, "Clarence, you got to have a routine. You got to get a system. You got to do it." And so you get a routine, and you stick with it. That's why you see people don't like changes. You've got to have so much work that you've got to get it done a certain time.
To get on top of so many cases, 8,000 filings last year?
You've got to move through them. And I've gone through virtually every one for 21 years. And so you get a system, you know what you're looking for. I do that on Sundays, and this was a non-sitting week, so it's relatively easy. There's no pressure. Then with reviewing cases, I have never assigned a single case in my entire tenure. I tell my law clerks when I hire them, everybody here is an adult. This is not a daycare center. You don't see kinder care up here. I hired adults, and everyone is to conduct themselves as adults, or himself or herself as an adult. And so they assign it to themselves, and I don't want to hear whining and complaining that I have too much to do. And we have certain rules about distribution of work. The rules that I lay out before the term are really quite simple. I have 0 excuses, 0 tolerance for tardiness, mistakes, and excuses. You take your whining elsewhere. And I expect everybody to be up and running when the term starts. No, there's no time for startup. And that sounds pretty harsh, but hey, that's life. That we have stuff to do. I also give people a chance to back out of the clerkship after we lay down the rules. It's a pretty, my wife said that, boy, that's a really nice welcome mat you laid out. But I think it's honest and pretty candid about what my expectations are. And then when I go in, the kids start, they do the bench memos. They assign themselves the cases. And every clerk has to be prepared in every case. So we have what we call, I read the briefs on my own. I do hard copy. If I'm traveling, I do it on the good reader, on the iPad. But mostly I like to just sit in my chair at home and read them in the afternoons or late at night. So we have clerk conference for every case. The clerk who has the lead presents. The others offer their opinions. Why? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? Why? Clerks always go first. I don't want to preempt them with my own personal opinions. And that's if we're assigned the opinion, the clerk who has the lead does the initial draft. Then we have structured rounds of edits. It's just built into our manual. That came from my early years of getting a lot of really mushy first drafts and having to cut down really bad, long opinions. And I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense. So our opinions are refined. And then I always do the final round. Sometimes you have to, one part of our packet is we have an outline, which we call a disposition memorandum for the disposition of every case. So you just literally, here's how we will dispose of this case. And we have a preliminary before oral argument, and then we finalize that. It's always an outline form. So it's an outline. How you would start an essay or you would start a research project with an outline. That's what we end up with after our conferences and after argument and reviewing the briefs. And that is then the beginning, together with the notes from conference, that is the outline for a draft opinion. Wow. So, but there's a process for it. You don't just suddenly wake up and here it is. There's a process for it. And that's every single case. And that's gone on now for almost 20 years. So you have like a history of the approach that we took and why and how we refine that. So once the opinion's drafted, and I've made the final edits, then we circulate. Now, we do most of that. I do virtually every bit of my editing online, or at least in track changes, which is very quick and it allows you. So I do most of the reading of the drafts on the computer, and I work on the computer.
You're very high tech.
No, I think I'm pretty low tech, but my clerks insisted on my doing it that way because it is easier because I can email it.
Sure.
And no matter where I am, I can email edits. I can be in Georgia, I can be in Europe, I could be here. I mean, I logged on this morning before I came over. You can handle a lot of matters very quickly and fairly securely. I don't know what's secure anymore, but it goes through a secure VPN, so we'll see.
Do you approach constitutional cases any differently than statutory administrative cases?
Yes. Statutory cases can tend to be pretty straightforward for the most part. Administrative law cases, they have the ambiguities, but it's fairly. I think you read the text and you sneak a peek at legislative history. Why I'm thinking of that, looking at legislative history, just that movie Grinch, why is that in my head? Where he says that he's invited to this party, he's about, what would I wear? I don't know why that's in my head. But at any rate, I think that the constitutional cases are a little bit harder.
It wouldn't come to you if they were easy.
They're hard. Look at my hair. What's left of it. It's hard. There's some of these things, you just don't want to see them anymore. It's like, let me out of here. We grant cert on it, I remember when we were doing the war cases, those are really, really hard cases. And I guess you sometimes get a little disappointed the way people talk about them, as though you're for this or you're for that, and you're just trying to use a methodology. I think Professor Freed was talking in his class today about these various interpretive models, which I thought was really interesting, because you sit there and you're trying to use existing precedent to handle something that's different. And what model do you use? What approach do you use? And so yes, they tend to be fairly difficult. And it does matter which one you choose. Just as I was saying he was saying to his students today, that that you can disagree with the models, but you got to use something. You got to have some mode of analysis.
Are there any particular experiences or writers or ideas or models that are most influential in how you approach your job?
Well, actually, the best advice I got was from Larry Silberman on the DC Circuit, another Harvard graduate. Boy, they're all around me, and I'm surrounded at the court by Harvard grads. But he said when I became a district judge, he said, I won't tell you how to decide cases, but here's some advice I give you, that you approach every case with this question: how would I decide, what is my role in this case as a judge? And that was probably the best advice I've gotten, not as a citizen, not as an activist, just as a judge. And that has been a very important piece of advice. Probably for me, the opinion that I read for inspiration is the dissent in Plessy. It's made me very fond of the first Justice Harlan. The notions expressed in that opinion were the things that those of us in sort of an unlearned way held on to in the South. And I was very pleased to hear that was Justice Marshall's favorite opinion years later. But the notions there were the things that made it, that said when all else was going one direction, this was something that was headed the right direction. So I think that one more than any other, and the honesty in there, where I think it's honest, where he says his views on matters of race is that whites will be superior for all time, but, and then the Constitution knows no caste, knows no color. So that would be my favorite.
One of the things that's exceptional about that opinion is, many people try to excuse the majority, saying you just have to remember what people thought at the times. The fact of his opinion and how he wrote it shows that is no excuse.
He was the only Southerner who sat on that. And I think he understood that was a fundamental wrong.
Yes.
And you didn't need any social science, and you can't excuse it by all these other things that came up, but it was just fundamentally wrong. And it's something you grow up embedded in you, that this is wrong. So, but anyway, I would have to say that is my best model.
What makes for effective advocacy before the court?
Oh, survival of my colleagues. Oh, that was a slip. I know it's recorded. Don't YouTube me on that. But I think I go back to a constant theme of mine. I've been doing this a long time. When someone comes up with some shrewd argument, I've heard all those before. I think honesty. I think candor. I remember one technique I used to use when I argued was, if I didn't have the law, I would always admit it. But you can go, you have to just say, look, the law. People come to the court and they say, this case, an opinion you just wrote, covers this like a glove. Well, then why did we grant cert? Why did we grant cert? We did not grant cert to say this covered it like a glove. That's a summary reverse or summary affirm. So obviously, so you wouldn't say that. So what you say is that the logic of that case gets you there. I mean, that's candid. It just doesn't quite get you there, but the logic, and then you explain. I think candor is really important. Now, people may sit up there and you may not think they're as smart as you are, but assume they can go to somebody as smart as the advocate. I think there have been a few times since I have been there when people have been, quote, less than candid with the court.
Really?
That becomes a topic of conversation at lunch. Less than candid with the court. There is no advocate who wants the court to say he or she has been less than candid with the court. You're done. You're done. People are looking at you askance from then on. I think you come up, you're honest, you're thorough in your work, and you're candid, you're honest. I think that for advocacy before the court, I think it requires a certain flexibility because you're going to get pummeled. I don't know how people do it these days, but I think you're going to get pulled back and forth. So there's a certain flexibility, but I think the candor and the honesty and the thoroughness are far more important. And certainly in the briefs, because I think most of the work is done in the briefs.
Yes, of course. The current court is described as a hot bench.
I don't know what that means.
Maybe that many of the justices interrupt each other with their questions.
Well, I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, I don't like it that way, but that's, I'm nobody's boss.
Does it help or hurt?
It doesn't help, in my opinion.
I do understand that it was Chief Justice Berger who had the architectural suggestion to at least have the bench curved so people can see each other before
See each other talk.
So there's maybe a little less interrupting.
Look, I think I'm going to pass on that area.
All right.
I do not agree with, I think it's unnecessary to deciding cases to ask that many questions. And I don't think it's helpful. I think we should listen to lawyers who are arguing their case. And I think we should allow the advocates to advocate.
What's the most challenging part of your job?
Loss of anonymity. That's the hardest part. It's not, I mean, deciding cases, that's my job. The loss of anonymity.
What's your favorite part of the job?
My law clerks. I love my law clerks. And I like my colleagues, but I really love my law clerks. They're my kids. No, they're my kids. They become my family. I spend a lot of time with them. I demand a lot from them. They work a lot of hours. They're really, really good kids. They're extremely smart. I co-teach with one of my former law clerks at George Washington University now, Greg Maggs, and I love it. I mean, he's my kid. He's one of mine, and I just look at him, and he's now older than I was when he clerked for me. And I just love being with my law clerks. They're just sort of like your offsprings. And they're really, really good kids with different personalities. I love being a part of their lives. I have a monthly reunion with my former law clerks, monthly luncheon. I think these kids are what I would like to have been like if I was more engaged in law school and if I had an opportunity to clerk. I mean, you were close to Justice Marshall. I just think it's a wonderful part of the job. I also enjoy my colleagues very much. I like them very much. And finally, with respect to the job, I like the idea that I get to live up to my oath. I took an oath, and every day I've gone in. My job and my clerk's job is to help me live up to that oath, and I try to live up to it. Beyond that, I don't, there's not, I can't say that whether it's like or dislike, I just do my job.
I'm just going to ask two more questions and then invite some questions from you all. Who are your heroes?
My grandfather and my grandmother, the people I grew up with. I've met a lot of people. I've met every living president and some of those who have passed. read about a lot of great people, but there was nobody greater than my grandfather. How an unlettered man raised by a freed slave, raised in part by a freed slave, was not bitter, had the foresight to raise these kids, and when he didn't have to, was responsible when people had excuses for not being responsible, grew up with a dignity in the South that denied dignity. The admiration, I have a bust of him overlooking me in the office, and this is one of his favorite sayings, "Old man Ken is dead, I helped bury him." So I just have undying admiration for my grandparents. So there are others I admire. There are people, I admire Justice Marshall, particularly for his work across the South. That took a lot of guts. You go to some of those counties.
Yeah, boy.
I admire the judges in the South. I admire my nuns who left Ireland and came and educated these kids in Georgia and believed in us and didn't go preaching it, actually did it. So, I mean, there are lots of people. I admire people who do. I admire one of my law clerks who graduated from Harvard and then went off and to Mother Teresa orphanage for a year and then went on to Yale Law School. He was just a good person. I admire that. I saw a young woman this morning. What's her name? Haben. I admire her. I admire that kind of courage and that kind of goodness in a person. So people think that the people you admire most are these people who are well known. I think most of the people I admire aren't that well known. And the Pearlie Carter at New Haven Legal Assistance, who took the time out, she lived in the projects off Dixwell Avenue, took the time to school me. And she was, again, someone who lived in the project, had more wisdom than so many people, many leaders I've met. So, but I could go. I mean, there are many more, but I'm not going to go through the whole list. But you get the idea.
Very powerful, yes. My last question is, what advice would you give to people currently in law school? Advice about their schooling, about their careers, about being the kind of person that, you really inspire me, a person who really cares about integrity, about the values, about respect. What advice would you give?
Well, I'm old-fashioned. I think that I still believe in the old virtues of being kind and being good to people, being positive, there's a lot of reasons to be negative in society. I can find, I was telling the dean that I was out here rioting in 1970, and because I was mad at the world. And that was negative. That was cynicism and negativism eating me up, hatred, animosity. And I felt justified because of all the race issues. I was really upset. How do you let that go? How do you say, I'm going to, despite how I'm treated, I am not going to be that way. I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to try to be a good person. It's kind of fallen on deaf ears these days, or it's old-fashioned to say you should just be virtuous. You should try to treat people the way you want to be treated. You try to do your best. You help people who need help. You prepare so that you can be helpful. One line I like to use with younger people is simply that you do well so you could be in a position to do good. If you can't do well now, you can't do good later. And I don't know what we talk a lot about ideology and politics and these macro and global issues. I think a lot of things are, how do you treat your neighbor? One of the things I look for when I see people is I watch how they treat the least among us. The people who work in the cafeteria, the people who work on the elevator, the cleaning people, the people in the hotel. And that person, that's not a good person who treats these people badly. That's not a good person. I would never hire anybody. I wouldn't jerk like that. There's no way. So why is that falling out of fashion? I think you treat people the way you want to be treated. You're already smart. You wouldn't be here. You're smart. You take care of your business here. You don't feel entitled that because I have the Harvard imprimatur that suddenly it's over. No, it's just beginning. But to work hard to develop those habits that lead to the leadership that you want. Some of you may believe that homelessness is a problem. Well, do well and solve it. Some of you may believe that we need to deliver legal services to the poor. Well, do well and deliver it. Some of you may believe in a different mode of constitutional analysis. Well, do well and make the arguments or decide the cases. You know, I just encourage you, but most of all, just try to be honest, try to be good people, but do well. Do well, and your turn will come soon enough. I was just doing the math in my mind. I wound up on the court 17 years after I graduated. 17 years went very fast. And I made my final payments on my student loan my third term on the court. So good luck.
Is there someone who would like to ask a question, a short one? Would you stand up, maybe come to a mic? Do you mind doing that? And you can say your name. Yes.
I'm Elliot. I'm a 2L. Thank you so much for coming. So I thought the advice that you had received from Judge Silverman was very interesting. And I was wondering if you at any point have felt torn where, if you've been in a situation where you felt that a stance that you had to take, based on your role as a judge, conflicted in some way with your own feelings, and where you felt uncomfortable taking that stance as a citizen or as a person?
Let's say there were some challenges, particularly early on and even in some recent cases where if I could do what I wanted to do, I would do things differently. And I think that would be surprising to some. But yeah, you're constrained by it. A case that's been long enough ago, over 20 years ago, the Haitian refugee cases are among those. I was torn with those because of what it meant. But you wind up having to have the discipline to do your job, and that's pretty hard. And once you cease being a judge, how can you demand that others be a judge and not sort of use the law to impose their own personal preferences? It's very difficult. It's less difficult now, but it's no less painful when you can't do something where you think that something is wrong.
Next question. I have more, so I'm happy to keep going. Sure, come on over. Identify yourself.
Hello. Hi, Justice Thomas. Hi, Dean Minow. My name is Armand. I'm a 1L. My question is, do you think it's a disadvantage for the court to have all Harvard and Yale law graduates?
Oh, well, I get in trouble if I say that, but trouble being my middle name. No, I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I think it would be good to have some of the others too. It's just, I don't think it's bad that we have people from one part of the country, but I think it'd be better if we had people from other parts of the country. And I think there are different points of views out here. And I think there are really good, smart people in some of the other schools. For example, I have a clerk this year from Berkeley. I know there's smart people in Berkeley. There's smart people at Stanford. At least that's what they tell me. I don't know. You see, and there's smart people, kids at Georgia or at
Louisiana State.
LSU. My lead law clerk last year was from LSU. She was really smart. If I see her in Fighting the Bear, I'd go help the bear because she would be. I tell you, she is tough as nails and smart. But I don't think it's a problem. I think it would be better if we understood there were other schools too.
Justice Thomas, you've spent much of your career in public service.
Oh my goodness, on the dole.
What would you say are the gratifications of serving the nation?
I don't know. This is my job. As I said to kids today, I wanted to be a priest. And I don't think you ever get over wanting to be a priest. That you would, and I don't mean like saying mass or anything like that, I mean, you're always looking for a vocation. What am I called to do? And that's why I went to Georgia, why I went to law school, to return to Georgia, because I thought I was called to return home and to lead. Same thing I said to the young people here, that is, you do well to do good. And that didn't pan out, but you wind up being in public service. I made a decision when I turned 30 years of age, that I would never take a job for money, that I would always be free. I would never focus on money, that I needed money. I didn't have any money. That meant a lot of empty apartments and beat up cars and no vacations and things like that. But what it freed me to do were things I believed in. It always gave me the liberty to say what I thought, because I was never working for money. I never worked for promotion. When I was at EEOC, I had this rule: I wouldn't put any pictures on the wall, because people got fired a lot in these administrations. You served at the pleasure of the president. So I always told my staff that I'd like to be able to, so the rule was that if the president called you on Friday afternoon and expressed great confidence, wink, wink, it was time for you to leave. So you were fired. So I always wanted to be in a position to be out of there in 10 minutes. So I would never put any photos on my wall, and I never wanted to be focused on any job. So I truly mean it when I tell you, I just did my job. And I fully expected to be run out of Washington. I expected to be fired at some point. And I have no idea why I wasn't, but I was grateful to be allowed to do my job. But I think not being focused on money and position freed me to do what I believed in. So I've been fortunate throughout my life, no matter what job I've had, to do exactly what I believed in.
You were not only the longest serving chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, you made it a fully disability accessible workplace.
I give a lot of that credit to my chief of staff, who's now the marshal of the court. We did a lot of things. We automated, we did a lot of things to make it an organization, but I give a lot of that credit to the people there. They understood computers, they understood how to build systems, and when I fully believe, how can we talk about all these sort of theoretical issues when there are people who can't get in the front door of the building? So what we did was we made sure that was not going to happen. People had a right to show up, be able to come and do their jobs. And so we took care of that at EEOC. And I believe very strongly about that. One of my best friends was quadriplegic. And I watched how a 2-inch curb was like the Great Wall of China for him. And I vowed, this is back when I first got out of law school, I vowed that never, never would I be in charge of something where he could not, or someone could not be permitted to be a part of it. And there are lots of things. I think we do that with the opinions we write. We write them in a way that they're inaccessible to the average person. And so what I tell my law clerks is we write these so that they are accessible to regular people. That doesn't mean that there's no law in it, but the language. There are simple ways to put important things in language that's accessible. So as I say to them, the beauty, the genius is not to write a 5-cent idea in a $10 sentence. It's to put a $10 idea in a 5-cent sentence. That's beauty. That's editing. That's writing. So the editing we do is for clarity and simplicity without losing meaning and content, and without adding things. You don't see a lot of double entendres, or you don't see word plays and cuteness in the opinions. We're not there to win a literary award. We're there to write opinions that some busy person or somebody at their kitchen table can read and say, I don't agree with a word he said, but I understand what he said.
You know, sometimes the oral statements that you and your colleagues will give in announcing an opinion are in more simple language than the published opinion. Sometimes it's made me think that sometimes the oral statement is what we ought to have printed.
Well, I think people are trying to communicate to the audience. Did I lose my mic? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Boy, gravity in the mic. Let's see. Has it been gone a long time? I think they were right in the statements in the court when we announce opinion. It's for the audience, and so people are trying to make it clear,
Accessible.
accessible. But I think we can do the other opinions that way too, without losing any of the meaning. And I forget the gentleman who is the author, who works with Justice Scalia a lot, but he's the author of Black's Law Dictionary. Brian Garner. He asked me once, he said, why is it your opinions are, I think he said, 25% shorter on average than your colleagues? I had no idea. And of course, I don't follow any of this stuff. And I said, I think I would say it's editing. Editing. We do a lot of editing. And it's very aggressive editing. So we eliminate a lot of trivial, a lot of nonsense from the opinions. And I do not like cuteness, in my opinion. You know, you save it for your own stuff. It is all meat and potatoes. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? I shouldn't have said that.
One more question. Can you come to a mic? I'm sorry. Oh, there's somebody ahead of you. Okay.
Well, let him go.
We'll do two. Go ahead. You go ahead. You're right there.
Thank you for coming, Justice Thomas. My name's David Husband. I'm a 3L. And I wanted to ask, given what you're talking about with varied backgrounds and the clarity of opinion, we used to appoint a lot of politicians to the court. And I think right now on the court, we basically only have one non-politician and everyone else has served as a judge for some portion of time. Do you think that has inhibited the clarity and the ability to communicate to the nation, and that we've created even more complex methodologies as a result of that? Would you be in favor of appointing people to the court who come from different backgrounds that are not judicial in nature, but are from aspects of society that are involved with the law?
Oh, absolutely. Why not? I mean, but remember, we've had courts like that. I think it's cyclical. Justice White was never a judge. Justice O'Connor was a state court judge. Justice Kagan was never a judge. Chief Justice Rehnquist was never a judge. So I think it's fairly cyclical. I was a judge for 2 minutes. I mean, I was there long enough. It was really odd. I was on D.C. Circuit. I ordered my furniture, and it takes a little while. I'm not big into furniture stuff. You got a chair, fine, we're good. Or I didn't need a new desk or anything. Just get the guy's initial out of it. I'm good. But so the furniture finally shows up, and it's got a tag on it, and they nominate me to the Supreme Court. And so I always thought there was a conspiracy to get my furniture. So I really hadn't been there that long, so you can't really, you can put a little asterisk next to me as a former judge. Chief Justice wasn't a judge very long. You can put a little asterisk next to him. So I do think there's merit to, just like I said about the schools, I think there's merit to getting people from all sorts from different backgrounds and different parts of the country. Why not a state court? Why not a state Supreme Court? Why not Minnesota? I just think there's all sorts of people you can get. That's what I try to do when I hire law clerks. I like to have some, my wife said my law clerks are like the United Nations. I like having some of everybody. I like having, it is absolutely fabulous. It is just everybody agreeing. I don't want that. I want people who look at things differently. Maybe the court would be, one of the reasons that it was great having people from the West. Have you ever thought, where are you from?
Virginia.
Okay, so states like Virginia don't have this problem. States like Georgia don't have this problem. When you get out west, water is the problem. And the water issues are key. Well, for those of us on the East Coast, they say, well, you don't have water. Well, drill a well. Well, you got a mile of pipe for me to use. But, in the South, it was like 10 feet. We had all the water we needed. So having Justice O'Connor, Justice White, people from the West, they understood all those issues and brought a sort of a base knowledge to the court that was very helpful and informative.
The fact that you worked in-house for a company, I think, is an important insight for the court, and they have people who've seen business.
Well, I would like to take credit, and I know you offer that in the spirit of generosity, but I was so low on the totem pole. I wonder how much I could add. I was really a low-level attorney, And I wish I had had more access, but I think that I would be overstating my importance if I accepted that kind compliment. I probably brought more from the department, from the Attorney General's office, and from the Hill, and from EEOC, where I was actually more engaged.
Last question.
Hi, Mr. Justice. Thanks for coming. I'm Eric Rice. I'm a 2L. You spoke a lot at the beginning about, well, starting with Dr. Seuss, the importance of books in your life, and then about the sort of clear, concise writing you want in your opinions and lack of cuteness. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit for a minute about the important writers and books that you admire and have been influenced by.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. You know, I wanted to say I've read so much of Paul Johnson, but he doesn't edit a whole lot. Wow, that's really a good question. I wanted to go to people like Faulkner, but that would be elusive. I've read a lot of economics. You know, as a writer, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked me that. You know, I read a lot of books, but I don't read them for the style that I use. That's really a good question. I'd have to give that some thought. I have to punt on that and go back and think. I read a lot, but the books are long, and some are really kind of boring, but it's really interesting. You know, it's sort of funny. You have this stack of things that my wife says, you are eclectic. I read a lot. I really enjoy reading. But I can't think of an author whose style I follow. You've caught me. You know, what if I said someone like Harper Lee?
Okay, that's good. That's a good choice.
You know, but I really like clarity. And I'm trying to think of someone now, because most of the people aren't all that clear.
When you read for leisure, if
really
you have any, you read lots of history.
I've read a lot of history. I did, you know, I have kicks, whether it's economics or just, I got on a Churchill kick, a Lincoln kick, get on the Civil War. I think you have to understand the Civil War to understand the 14th Amendment. We do a lot of research, even when the McDonald opinion, to go back and look behind that whole process of the debates around the 14th Amendment. Not because I'd started with a preconceived notion, but just to try to understand. But I try to read a lot of history. I've read a lot of economics. I think it is imperative or incumbent on us, or it behooves us, to continue to grow in areas. And that's why I like good scholarship as opposed to things that are just vitriolic. That the really good scholarship, you stop yourself and you say, oh, I never thought of that. Mm-hmm. It's a really honest scholarship. Even when you don't agree with it, you said, oh, I never thought of that. And it stops you in your track and you want to think about it. And, you know, I owe you one. I owe you an answer, and I'm sorry.
Harper Lee's pretty good.
No, but I owe him an answer. I have never thought about which authors that I've had to borrow things from so many in life. Someone asked me recently, when did I finally I grew up speaking Geechee, and at least in my early life, someone asked me, when did I finally become comfortable with the English language? And I said, in my 30s, probably around 86 or 87. And that was years of crossword puzzles and vocabulary building and grammar, being very technical in use of, in my grammar, and following the rules of grammar. In reading, again, I remember reading Ayn Rand at 16 or 17, reading The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and it would take me like 10 minutes or 20 minutes to read a page. because I didn't know the words. So I had to look up every word. I still have my little Funk and Wagnalls that I use. Cover's gone, but so I borrowed a lot from a lot of people, and I know there's somebody in my mind that was very clear in his or her writing, but it doesn't come to mind right now. It wouldn't have been something I don't think I've read recently. It would have to have been something I read either in college or shortly after college. And it may have been somebody who just wrote briefs. I mean, I wrote a lot of briefs very quickly, and so I used a very simple, clear style in a lot of editing. I can't remember right now exactly who it was or whose style I tried to follow, but I don't think it's anybody famous. But if I think about it, I owe you one. You come by and I'll tell you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Justice.
Justice Thomas, you have been so warm and so generous. I cannot tell you how thankful we are. We began by quoting Alexander Hamilton via the words of our wonderful Wiley Vaughan. Here's another Alexander Hamilton that I thought we'd end on. He said, "Those who stand for nothing fall for anything." And I think, Justice Thomas, you stand for so much, and we are so very grateful for your service to the country and your presence here at Harvard Law School.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for your hospitality.